Matura's Mandala.
I get more letters about this next record than any other ones that I get actually, and it's because the group were very close to me, and some of them lived with me for a while in California, and then I sent them over here. And the lead singer Rick Brown wrote the song, and he was eventually engulfed by the shadow, and the whole group broke up, and it's very sad indeed. Lead guitarist Glenn Campbell is working with a group in California who've just been recorded with the unfortunate name of the Dirty Blues Band. Anyway, this was recorded about a year ago, and I still think it sounds great. I think it's one of the great sort of records of all time, actually. The Misunderstood, and I Can Take You to the Sun.
Namaste and welcome. What links John Peel with 60s psychedelic rockers The Who, The Pretty Things, with the Vietnam War draft, fugitives on the run, ashrams in India, the summer of love in San Francisco, Allen Ginsberg, Timothy Leary, planetary gemology, and the Thai royal family? Well, the answer is Rick Brown, former lead singer of the 60s psychedelic rock group The Misunderstood. In a September 2004 review in Cream magazine, it was stated, "The saga of The Misunderstood is one of the most unbelievable, heartbreaking, and unlikely stories in the entire history of rock." So I am now thrilled and honoured to have Rick, now known as Rishikesh, as the first guest on my new podcast platform, the channel called Matura's Mandala. So sit back, enjoy the ride. Here is the full epic interview with Rick Brown, aka Rishikesh, that we recorded recently. We really think you're in for a treat and you're going to enjoy it. Thank you. So now we've introduced what people are going to listen to, because the story actually goes to India after this story, and he ends up from in a very obscure ashram in India by anybody's standard, and funnily enough coinciding within weeks of when the Beatles went on their India trip to Rishikesh to see Maharishi a few weeks later in '68. So it's a story of the era, of the times, and Rick's it's what was happening between the Western youth who were looking for something and ending up being very attracted to Eastern spirituality. That's a big theme of this story. And then that's going to take us through that story. And when we get there, it's going to be fascinating, because for the Krishna people watching this, you're going to be the perspective that Rishikesh Ananda is going to share is something that is extraordinary. Even for devotees who've been around the Krishna phenomena for years, and in India, no one has had this type of experience. And then it's going to move on, but we won't move too far into the story at present. What we're just going to we've just given you a taste of where the story is going to go and the ingredients. So please, Rishikesh ji. I'm going to call you Rishikesh because it's easier than Rishikesh Ananda. And most of them, if there's Misunderstood fans, they'll be knowing you as Rick, okay? But you were born Richard Shaw Brown. So maybe you can explain just a little bit of background of your family, what kind of led you to the Misunderstoods, and the key moments and the atmosphere and the things that were driving you as a young person growing up in Riverside, California.
Well, we really grew up, my family, I really grew up, with my family in many places, because my dad would get transferred every few years to a different state. So, but when I had to go to high school, he had been transferred to California. And there was an Air Force base, March Air Force Base in Riverside, where he was stationed, and we lived there. And so I went to high school in Riverside, and that's where I met the guys in the band. We were the small group of surfers that were going surfing every week, and then we started this band, and became the Misunderstood, when we started, being influenced by the British sound, the Kinks and the Animals and all these British sounds. We didn't like the American sound, which we thought was hokey, and so we started playing the British sound, writing our own material, and then when we got a really good guitar player, Glenn Ross Campbell, who played steel guitar, which is 4 steel picks, a steel bar, and 9 steel strings, and nobody plays it like he does. I mean, he did it like, he did a really hard rock version. And so that's when we realized, wow, we can do just about whatever we want. And so then we got discovered by John Peel. We were playing around Riverside and playing in Hollywood at Pandora's Box, and he became our manager, and he wanted us to go to England.
He was John Peel working was a DJ in America at that time.
Yeah,
but he was under the name of
John. He was a DJ at a radio station. Yeah, he was a DJ at that time, a young DJ in California at a place called a radio station KMEN, and he was the British, the Beatles expert with the British accent and a young guy, and so. But he really fell in love with us, and we fell in love with him, and so he really encouraged us to go to England, and 4 of the guys took a ship, because I had to wait behind a few weeks to go to my draft physical for the military, and so after I went about 3 or 4 weeks after they did, and then I just flew over there, and then we got a record deal after some months of difficulty. We got a record deal with Fontana Records through John Peel's brother. In London, who introduced us to a manager who introduced us to Fontana Records.
I've heard in some of the other talks how that this gig, after John Peel met you, he helped organise. In some of the interviews, John Peel raves about this spectacular gig that when Glenn Campbell joined your group, and he arranged this gig. Where was that? A place in Los Angeles? That's the gig where you know.
Pandora's Box.
Okay, so
Pandora's Box.
And then you also went into a studio with John Peel, kind of helping you make a kind of demo. And what
Right.
were those songs that you did in those demos? What was the kind of things that you were doing there?
That was in Gold Star Studios, which is a legendary studio in Hollywood, and we did I think we did 7 blues numbers, which were just as orthodox as they could be, and 1 psychedelic number, I'm Not Talking, which we used to do with like a 5 or 6 minute version of it, with a lot of psychedelic weird sounds and screaming feedback, and that was what got us the record deal in England.
Okay, and
that sound
and those words, and you were the front man, you were the singer, Greg was the guitarist. Right. Can you just give the names of the other members in the band at that time?
Well, when we went to England, I was the lead singer, and Greg Treadway was the rhythm guitar player, or the guitar player, and Glenn Ross Campbell was the steel guitar player, and then Rick Moe was the drummer, and Steve Whiting was the bass player.
Okay. And that song that you said that you wrote, was this something you developed, or was it something you wrote just at that time when you met John Peel?
No, we used to play it live. It was just one of our live songs. It was actually a Yardbirds song that we rearranged it.
Uh-huh.
And actually, we did it pretty straightforward when we did it in America, but we put a lot of psychedelic effects in there. And then when we went to England, they wanted us to remake it in a 2-minute version. And so we totally rearranged it. Put the beginning at the end, and the end at the beginning, and the middle, and just change it all around and reduce it to 2 minutes. And it came out pretty good. And that's what Dick Leahy of Fontana Records flipped on. He said, "That's the sound." That's what we want.
When one looks at these eras of 66, 67, it's almost like there's so much stuff historically, and there's so many characters on the musicological field going on at that time, right, developing, and and you're in California, and so this thing that's going to you're kind of pre-hippie. Really, the photographs that you see of you're more mod looking, than what became. Yeah. And also we discussed about this, but I'm interested to clarify it a bit, because it's interesting, the word psychedelic, because at this time as well, you're born in 47, in 66, you're 19. and you're young, and the rest of the members, and the big psychedelic scene was going over. You were around L.A. Riverside. It was happening in San Francisco. Other people were doing it now. As far as I know, and you told me, you had any of the other members actually taken psychedelics before you went to England? No.
No, before we went to England, nobody knew where to actually get LSD. It was kind of like a cool thing to talk about, but nobody actually knew where it was. And we were just high school guys, and nobody knew where to get LSD. We weren't even looking for it.
Right, but the words.
It was just cool.
Yeah. So it somehow, though, even though psychedelic was underground still at that time, because it surfaces a bit in Revolver, doesn't it, in '66, but it's not, it doesn't really surface until '67 in the public media. It's kind of brewing. So that's what's interesting about your story, that the misunderstood, you're on this cusp of things that are brewing in '66. What is the exact date that you eventually... you arrived 3 weeks. You had a plane that your mother paid for the ticket, and the group went on a boat over.
Right.
And what is the months, the days that you did that?
I think around July.
Okay.
July.
And so that's
'66.
so. Okay, John Peel had called his mother and told his mother that these guys are coming over. What was the actual when? The other members of the group arrived before you. Did they go straight to John Peel's mother's house? How did that happen? That whole
Yes.
Wow.
Oh, that's a big long story. I wasn't part of it, but I mean, it's part of a big long article written by Mike Stacks and about how they came with all their equipment and set it up outside, and she wasn't there, nobody was there, and so and then it started raining, and so they had to put tarps above all the equipment and get inside there, and it rained for like 3 days, and they waited for 3 days for her. She didn't come. She was out of town.
Oh my goodness.
She finally comes back after 3 days of being out of town, and there's these soaking wet guys covered in a tarp in front of her house and a pile of gear. And who are you guys? Yeah, we're the misunderstood. And she goes, well, that's pretty obvious.
Brilliant. That's so funny. But John Peel himself was still in America at this time.
Right.
So was it his? So apart from his mother, there's his brother Alan.
Right, Alan. Right.
So what did Alan help? Was he? I mean, did he help link you to the next stage of people?
He helped the four of them before I got there to meet Nigel Thomas, a British entrepreneur who had was managing a few bands, including Alexis Corner, blues band, and he became our manager, and he was the one who arranged that demo in IBC Studio to redo that song, I'm Not Talking, into a 2-minute version.
Okay.
And then he took that to Dick Leahy at Fontana Records, which was the biggest label in town.
Yeah.
And he loved us, and then he got him to come to the basement flat in Wandsworth. We were all staying together, which was a good period for the band because we were all together in one room.
So they'd
sleeping.
So they'd moved out of John Peel's mother's house, and you'd gone to a different place at night.
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay.
They were in John Peel's mother's house very short.
Oh, okay.
Then it was arranged for them to move into this place in Wandsworth Common, which was kind of a bombed out area of London and pretty funky. And it was just a basement underground with one single light bulb and some army cots around the sides.
Right.
And a leaky faucet. I mean, it was the funkiest. But anyway, we were all set up there in the middle. So it was a great time for the band because we could rehearse all anytime, any day. We rehearsed and played all kinds. And that's where we stayed even after we lost Greg and we had to replace him with Britisher Tony Hill.
Okay.
On guitar.
But that wasn't.
We did all the original stuff.
Okay.
Same place, same place.
So.
Because Dick Leahy heard that demo, I'm Not Talking, when Greg was just leaving. He didn't know anything about this.
Oh, I see.
Greg was leaving.
Why
he got drafted?
Oh, he got drafted. Okay.
Greg got drafted.
Okay.
He didn't want to he didn't want to deal with that, so he went back and joined the Navy. To not have to go to Vietnam. So he was going to get drafted. So anyway, this all happened at the same time. We had already that demo had been given to Dick Leahy, and he loved it. and then he came to hear us. And at that point, we had Tony Hill in the band.
Explain
And
about
so
the
we had
Tony.
written our.
So how did the Tony Hill join the band? Because he was English. You're
Well, he heard it.
American.
He heard it. Right. He heard us play at the Marquee Club.
Okay, can you explain
And we,
that would be very nice. Sorry, how the Marquee Club. So you come to London, you've met Nigel, you're in Wandsworth. That's just part of what your reality. Then you've got your social life, which is really interesting. The people that you're meeting. Right. I mean, you mentioned the other day to me that you you smoked some joints with Burt Yanks and John Renbourn from Pentangle and things like that. But who are the
Sure.
and
Well, that was before Pentangle.
Yeah, before Pentangle. Yeah. Now
Yeah.
So you haven't taken LSD in America, psychedelics, but you've suddenly come to England, and who were the main and the sound that you were emulating or inspired by from the English sound was you have said was the Yardbirds was your real they were the kind of you got influence, and also the Pretty Things. And so maybe you can explain about on your social life what happened in those with meeting Viv from the Pretty Things.
When I first, I didn't know who the Pretty Things were. Nobody in America knew who the Pretty Things were.
Oh, still not at that time, but Yardbirds, yes.
No, I mean back then, 66, nobody knew who the Pretty Things were.
Okay.
And so when I came there, I had no idea who they were. And as far as psychedelic was concerned, the way we saw psychedelic and the way it was being portrayed wasn't really about taking drugs. It was much as it was about thinking further than the material body,
Yeah.
And so if you really looked into the book, The Psychedelic Experience, which is based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it's all about becoming to realize you're not this body, which is Prabhupada's first teaching. You're not this body, and so psychedelic was an introduction to spiritual life that was above and beyond material life. And so that's way it wasn't about taking LSD because that didn't necessarily produce that result. It was something that did or didn't require drugs. It was something independent of that. So we weren't really looking for acid, but we were liking this idea that there's going to be a higher reality, and you could call it Buddhism or religion or whatever you wanted to call it, but we were just seeing it as the new. It was just anything was better than the Vietnam draft and the crazy American lifestyle where everybody's so neurotic, and. So when I first got to England, the very first night, we went back and we played because we hadn't played in a few weeks, and it was great. And then the next day we had to have a gig. They set up a gig for us in a little club named Knuckles.
Okay.
And Knuckles was in Soho.
Okay.
And it was a private gig, and there was it was a lot of people there, but there was people were invited, and this club was run by a guy named Vivian Prince, who used to be the drummer of the Pretty Things. And he was, at that time, the drummer of a band called the Bunch of Fives with Mick Wayne, guitarist Mick Wayne. And so we played there and in the club, and everybody was like, whoa, with Glenn Ross Campbell, you could hardly go wrong, And so they were all impressed, and then they took me to their place, and I met their band, and then they gave me some LSD. They came out with a silver. This is the next day. A little silver tray with little sugar cubes, and they had the book, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and Viv Prince is up there in the corner with a leopard skin hat on, rolling a big long joint, and they had the book, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the psychedelic experience, and so we took this acid, and nobody's sitting around going, wow, I feel. Everybody was like looking at this book and talking about the whole idea of consciousness and how it's separate from the body, and so all these things. So that was my first introduction to psychedelic, was that it's a subject about spirituality, and then taking LSD and being with these guys who anybody would think were just a bunch of crazy loons, but actually we're sitting there with this book, The Psychedelic Experience, and talking about that the whole day.
Where was Viv's house in London? Where was that happen?
He was staying. This is at the house of the singer of the band named Michael Doker. I can remember his name. So Viv was the drummer. So they used to rehearse at Michael Doker's place. It was someplace in London. I don't know. Okay. And so, but he was a rich kid. This guy Michael Doker was kind of a rich kid, so it was in a pretty good area. And Viv was always there every day, and Mick Wayne would be there. And so it was kind of like it was the scene where they rehearsed and hung out. So that was my first experience with LSD.
Okay.
Was in England, and with the Tibetan Book of the Dead and a bunch of heavyweight rockers talking about that angle, which is
Yeah,
basically Buddhism. Buddhism, you know.
yeah. Of the in the group, the other members of the Misunderstood, did they get the same kind of? Did they after this fascination with the spirituality that was brewing within everybody? Were they as interested as you, or were you kind of showing more interest in?
No, the bass player Steve was interested, and he came. We did that together, and then the drummer never was interested, but he was always, he thought it was cool and everything. He was just into the music, and Rick Moe, and then Glenn was just like, this total space kid. His mother was like a practicing witch. I mean, this guy was so spaced out.
Okay, yeah.
And
Okay.
and so he was like a totally space cadet. And then when Tony joined, Greg was also a square basically in that regard. But when Tony joined, he became my writing partner for the music, and we both were onto this wavelength of Find the Hidden Door, Eye Unseen, Children of the Sun, I Can Take You to the Sun. These were our songs, and this was the message was, wake up to spiritual life. And it wasn't really about drugs, even though they were trying to pigeonhole us in England at that time.
Yeah.
And there was even one occasion that was really funny because the media was interviewing us a lot at that time, and when the first record was getting ready to come out, they were saying, "This is about drugs. This is about drugs." No, it's not. So anyway, I had been taken by Nigel Thomas. Me and Tony had been taken by Nigel Thomas to some place to see some friend of his from school that was sold hash. So he was taking us. This is in early '66, taking us to score some hash for us.
Yeah.
So he takes us upstairs to this expensive place, and like from the fifth floor of some expensive place, and this guy opens the door, and it's just like dark in there, and this guy's like totally, wiped out on heroin or something, and people are sitting in the back. You can see people in the back were shooting up and had a belt, and the whole thing was like a death scene. It was like a scene from hell, And Tony and me and Tony are looking at each other like, "Whoa, man, this is weird, man." And that guy's selling the hash to his friend Nigel, and so this whole scene spooked me and Tony. It really spooked us. And so when we left the place, Nigel gave this hash to me, and I had it in my hand, So we're walking out, and when we were leaving the place, there was, when you exit the building, there's bushes on both sides, like a hedge, and so I said to Tony, "Oh man, this is like death." It's like, this is like scary stuff. And he said, yeah. So we threw it. We tossed it in the bushes. We both had to laugh that we had just spent the half a day to score this stuff and just threw it away because the place was so spooky,
God, yeah.
And so shortly after that, we were being interviewed, and they asked us about psychedelic and drugs. And I didn't tell them that story. I said something to insinuate that. And I said, if that's what you're talking about, then we ban drugs. We say you should ban drugs. And then the headlines came out in the newspaper said, "Misunderstood ban drugs." Oh, so funny.
Maturas Mandala.